In this lecture, we are going to authenticate the user with our custom endpoint. Previously, we left off with preparing the function for authentication. The next step is to add the logic for authenticating the user with their credentials. In your editor, open the signin.php file. We're going to authenticate the user after validating the request. First, let's extract the data into variables. Define a variable called email. The value for this variable will be the sanitize email function with the params user login variable. For this form, we are going to limit authentication to emails. It's possible to log in with a username. From my experience, authenticating users by their username can be tricky. Emails are considered reliable. Next, create a variable called password. The value for this variable will be the sanitize text field function with the params password variable. After extracting the data, we can proceed to authenticate the user. After the variables, run a function called wp-signon. The wp-signon function will authenticate the user into WordPress. It'll add a cookie to the user's browser to indicate the user has been logged in. This function performs the same actions as our previous solution. A cookie will be added to the user's browser to indicate they're logged in. You may be wondering, why aren't we using this function in our registration function? From my experience, the wp-signon function does not work properly for first-time users. If a user has not logged in before, this function may not behave properly. To avoid this issue, I like to manually authenticate the user for the first time. For subsequent logins, this function will behave normally. This function has one argument, which is an array of credentials. Let's pass in an array with a key called user login. The value for this variable will be the email variable. Next, add the password key. The value for this key will be the password variable. Lastly, let's set the remember key to true. By adding this key, users will be remembered on future visits to our site. You may want to disable this option if your site handles sensitive information. Let's keep moving forward. It's possible the authentication might fail. The user may have inputted an incorrect password. If that's the case, we should reject the request. The wp-signon function will return a user object upon success. Otherwise, an error will be returned. Let's store the result in a variable called user. Next, let's add a conditional statement. The condition will be the isWP_error function with the user variable. If the variable contains an error, we are going to return the response variable. Great! After making those changes, we're finished with the function. The solution is shorter than registering a user. There's not much to it. Let's try testing our new endpoint. Open the Postman application. If you haven't already, save the new URL into the authentication collection. I will set the name to login. Next, let's try logging in with valid credentials. Inside the body, I'm going to modify the credentials for the test user. Lastly, let's submit the request. As you can see, we've been logged into the system. Perfect! Our endpoint is complete. The next step is to prepare the form. Users should be able to log in from the browser. In the following lecture, let's start working on the login form.